Hello everyone. I guess let me know if you can hear me or what my audio problem for the day is, because that seems to be the theme on Beyond the Kit here, is a new audio problem every week. Oh, Coffee Nerdery Bear says, my newest paints arrived on Saturday. Looking forward to trying out my orange recommendation Goblin Skin. I hope you like it. So this show is going to be a little different than usual. I'm going to be talking about transport and shipping solutions for your miniatures. So I've been kind of focusing a little bit on getting ready for conventions, and I know it's easy for me that I think about the painting part and the what games am I going to play and all of those things, and then sometimes like the day before the convention I'm like, oh, now I have to take this miniature to the convention, or take these miniatures. The sync is off slightly. Let me try something. Okay, why did that menu not come up? Someday I will get a different camera. Do you think I'm ahead or behind? I'll just change a number and see what you think. Let's try that. Okay, so I'm trying again. Let me know if the sync seems a little weird still. So as I was saying, transporting miniatures can be an interesting situation. I'm going to switch over. So I'm going to be switching the cameras a lot and stuff today. I might even have to switch the lights some. But so I'm going to show some of these miniatures first while people get here, and also talk about some of the issues that you have to think about when you're transporting miniatures. So let me just do that a little. So for a person who's primarily interested in entering contests, this is not atypical. You are going to have different sizes, different kind of bases, all kinds of situations to deal with. And then if you're a game player, you probably have to think about the quantity and exactly which miniatures and what size they are. And then the goal, of course, is keeping them safe so that by the time you get to the event, everything looks fine. So I'll put the box off to the side and zoom in a little and talk about some specific figures and considerations. So I'll probably go through this a little bit again, but kind of the first thing to think about, I mean, there's a bit of a chicken and an egg situation. Sometimes you have to make your miniatures work with your carrying options. Here, I'll just put something on camera so it's not too boring. But sometimes you have to think about what are your transportation options for your miniature. So it's good to think about some of the things that you are most likely going to do. So one of the ones I mentioned was number. Are you trying to bring enough figures to set up a really cool RPG or play a skirmish or army game? That's going to require a different storage solution than if you're carrying a small number of miniatures, but some of them might be very fragile. And as Nara Paints mentioned, storing gets interesting too, and some of these methods you can use for storing. But I'm not much of an expert on store. I have two tiny cases, and if stuff doesn't fit in there, then it's either too crowded or it has to get rotated out. I'm going to put a little more light on. So this is, I mean, I haven't zoomed in the camera at all because this is a very big miniature. Actually, if you give me just one sec, maybe I can. Well, I do have Sir 4 scale, but here, we'll just put this guy. So there's a standard miniature there. And some of you may have this giant. I think she's from Bones 4. But this is actually the resin version that was a master. So this is much more fragile than the Bones version, and it's got this freestanding staff, and it's actually not as fragile or small as some resin pieces, but I had concerns, and then I have some base work that's coming off the edge and stuff like that. But so this is an example of not thinking things through. I picked out this piece of wood. The wood had those natural pitting, or I don't know, it was like an old diseased piece of wood, I guess, before. I think it was Caleb who was in back made this, but I'm not 100% sure now that I remember. But anyway, I liked, it gave me the feeling of like a mountainside and crags and stuff. And then I had the figure, and I added the base work and stuff. And then the part I didn't test or think about is how tall this is. And this is actually a little bit taller than any of my miniature cases. So what I was able to do is I had, my cases have shelves. I was able to take out a shelf and attach it to the bottom. But every show that I transported this to, or this is why this will never just be a standard figure that I bring to every ReaperCon and put on my desk for you to look at, because I'm ripping up the bottom of my case to transport it. So at a certain point, I wanted to be done transporting it after it went to all the shows and stuff. But I'll zoom in a little bit so you can see her a bit more. And if you're interested in kind of more of the thought process that went into this miniature and some of my experience with it, I will probably write a blog entry at some point, but there's an episode of The Crow's Nest that I was on where I did a deep dive on this miniature, and I talked about how I picked the colors, and I had some of the inspiration photos for the kind of the scenery element, and how I picked out, what to do for the freehand and those little things and all kinds of stuff like that. And then a bunch of stuff I did wrong too, because I didn't win anything with this miniature. This did not accomplish its goals at the convention that I went to. So there's stuff I did wrong as well. And it was a learning experience. But it was also a learning experience in maybe think about how you're going to transport things before you make the things. So that's why I wanted to show her. And then I have another one that had a similar issue. And this is actually, it's going to be hard. So if you look at it, so to me, this is right way up, and it looks the wrong way too because of how the document camera works. So when I lean it back, that little element isn't going to look correct. And again, I didn't really think about that while I was making the miniature. So the idea is that this is an incense sensor that she has. And she's in front of this temple. So fine, and I had a fine piece of chain, and that's how I decided to attach. This is a very slight conversion of a dark sword figure, and that's how I decided to attach it. And what I ended up having to do is I would put a little piece of bubble wrap around just this part, and then transport it as I transported it, and I'll talk about the different options. And then pretty much every time I brought it home, I have to repaint the little part right where it meets her hand. I think right now even it's chipped. I'm not sure if we can tell in close up. So this is another one that once it made the round of the conventions that I wanted to bring it to, it has not left my home again, and it is unlikely to, unless there's I don't think the piece is good enough to bring anywhere else, really. It's decent, but it's another one where I did some things wrong. And actually, if you look at if you've read any of my contrast articles on the blog there, this is one that the way it looked when I took it to the first contest is not the way it looks now. I came home and said, oh wow, this needs a ton more contrast. So there's kind of a before after of what a more contrast example looks like. And speaking of that, if you haven't watched this show before, you haven't watched a lot, that page there is where I write a lot of information about miniatures, and I've typically been doing with most of the shows, there's a follow-up where there might be photos of what I painted on screen or stuff like that. And one of them was I took I guess it was a speed painted miniature, and I touched it up to kind of give you an idea if you were someone who's entering game figures or you're just starting out, what a before and after on the kind of feedback that you're most likely to get at something like the MSP Open would look like. So you can see the pictures there, and there's of course, there's a stream you can watch live as well. So this one, I'll probably show again when I'm talking about some solutions. Maybe I'll put her to the side. There are various ways I would handle a figure like this. It would probably be fine to put it just in bubble wrap, which is going to be one of my favorite solutions that I talk about, but I would do that in different ways. But I just thought, sometimes this is not totally uncommon where you have kind of the plinth or the base is a lot bigger than the figure. So if you just wrap it, nothing's actually protecting the figure. So I want to talk about how we deal with that. What else have we got? So this is a bust. This is obviously a very unfinished bust, but he's on a plinth. So we can talk a little more about plinths. This is from a workshop I did with Kirill Knave. And I often, when I do miniatures in a workshop or a class, I don't always like to continue painting on them because it's a reference to what we did in the workshop. So I have another copy that someday I need to paint, but I probably never will finish this one. So if you don't finish your class miniatures, I wouldn't feel bad about that. There's some people like to just get the miniature and then they have a miniature, and other people prefer to do different things. So these two are ones that I did used to bring a lot to put on my desk at ReaperCon and stuff. And as I'll mention soon, when I can, I kind of like to use the bubble wrap solution. And there's even still a little bend on this, I think you can see. So this was bending a little bit because, you wrap the bubble wrap around and the pressure is going to be pushing inwards. So this was bending a little bit. And then a similar thing was happening with his staff. And they're metal figures, so I could bend it back. But I know that if you bend a metal piece back, if you bend a plastic piece back and forth enough, eventually it may break off. So these miniatures now either have to come in a freestanding method, which I'm going to talk about how those work, or they just have to stay at home. This is one of my favorite. I think this is probably still my favorite Sophie model that they've put out for the various ReaperCon Sophies. I like the fancy dress and the atmosphere of Bourbon Street. And I don't mind showing this now because they've made them available. So this is available on the website now, and so are most of the past ReaperCon Sophies. So I think I bought 3 of these and I hoarded them away. And then actually before I started working on this figure, I used to use the Dremel to kind of polish things, and it would help me find mold lines and stuff. And I Dremeled off her face. It slipped away from me. Or no, I think it was actually a piece of the bodice. But Reaper was very kind and let me put her in the melt bin and get a fresh one because I was very tragic about that. So I will put that over there as an example of the bending ones. This one would probably have a similar problem. In fact, this is a thinner piece even than either of those other two. And this, I use the magnet solution that I will talk about for freestanding miniatures. The basing on this is fairly solid, but even sometimes when you have a sturdy miniature, you can have basing that's not very sturdy. So I guess, as we all know, I don't exactly do a ton of basing, but this piece actually is incomplete because there is a bouquet that is supposed to be on the grave. And I think I can't even remember if I glued it down, which is something else to consider for contests. You want to attach everything. Like, we occasionally have people who come to the MSP Open and they'll have a plinth like this and they'll just rest the figure on top of it. The judges have all been trained to touch your figures as little as possible and pick them up like this. So we pick it up to like this to look at it, and you haven't attached it, and you can imagine how that goes. So please attach things, even if you're only going to use poster putty or something. And if you haven't attached something well, include a note with it so that we're aware, or if a piece is particularly fragile. But in this case, this is a nice sturdy mini. It's in a sturdy pose. Even this is metal. But this is just a very fragile little bush thing. If I wrap that the wrong way, the little bush is not going to survive. The trip and the bouquet that I made disappeared years ago, so it didn't survive the trip. This is a Reaper miniature, actually. Some of the ones I've been showing aren't Reaper miniatures, but this one is. This was one of the first ones where I kind of got to intermediate level, I would say. This is one of the first ones where I started working out how to do hair, so it's not perfect, but I was much happier with it than the hair I had been doing previously. And if you're interested in how I do hair, there is Reaper has a video of that on the YouTube channel. It's not from a Twitch stream. It's from before they were doing the Twitch streams as much. And then there's also an article on my blog with reference photos. This one is another example of, the basing's fairly sturdy, but this is like a clove. These are pieces of clove plant from, I think, a tea that I had. And after I steeped the tea, I dried out the plant matter to use for basing. So they're not like super fragile, but they're a little fragile and this is fragile. This is a metal figure, and then I puttied that, made the putty shorts and put them on with a tiny piece of wire. And then these are all conversions too. So it's decently sturdy, but I fitted it out to work with the magnetic type of case. So these are weird miniatures. I don't think they even make these anymore because I don't think they make metal miniatures anymore. And then these are actually parts off Kinder Eggs because I used to live in Canada, so Kinder Eggs are legal there. And I brought a bag full of Kinder Egg toys when I moved to America, because of course I would. Oh, I do have two of these. So these are Bones miniatures on their flat bottom, so they're going to be a lot easier to deal with. So if most of your gaming miniatures are Bones or similar sturdy plastic, you're going to have a little more flexibility of options than some of those fragile kind of display miniatures that I've been showing. So this one I painted with some of the ReaperCon paints and some of the Kickstarter paints that some of you are receiving right now. Oh, and I have an update from Justin. Hold on. Let me make sure I say it exactly right. He was informed a little while ago that the container would not arrive at Reaper until tomorrow. And then this one I painted with the Pathfinder. So if anyone asks in chat, if you guys can help me, let people know, because I'm sure people will be popping in to look for the container. So this one was painted with the Pathfinder paints. Sometimes if I have new kinds of paint or new sets of paint, sometimes I like to pick some of them out and just paint something with those to force myself to use them and get familiar with them and learn the colors and stuff. So put those to the side. I think that's almost everyone. Well, this is an example of how, I'm telling you to be very careful about how you put things together and stuff. So there are the current article on my blog is about conventions and shows. So if you've been to ReaperCon is kind of a mix of how you do the contests at those events. So the main part of it is show style, where we put things out on tables and we award medals. And then there's also a podium style or game convention style where we pick top 3 in certain manufacturer categories and stuff like that. But there are also military modeling or painting figure societies, and some of them have conventions, and there's one in Atlanta. And I recommend you look into these because they have a fantasy section. They're not military exclusive. And by fantasy, they mean sci-fi, horror, and what we would call fantasy. So anything that doesn't or hasn't existed in reality. And then historical actually includes modern people too. So today is historical eventually. So I recommend checking out those conventions if you have one, or those shows if you have one that's close to you. And often they will do a workshop beforehand. So this one, I got to do a workshop beforehand with Fernando Ruiz. No, it's FER is his miniature company, and that's where this miniature comes from. And now I'm like, because I didn't write it down, I'm like totally blanking on the painter's name because I'm old. But so I painted this right before the show, and then I was like, well, I like it all right if I, by the end of the workshop, I'm like, if I just finish up his jacket, I could enter this in the show. Why not? That'd be fun. But I didn't have a base. So a friend had this little cheap plastic base, and he's just held on there with like a paperclip wire. This is not ideal, but I actually have taken this to conventions since then, and I secured the base with somebody. But so this is, if something happened and this fell off and I was at a convention, that would be on me. I would not consider that to be an issue with the contest staff. Yes, Fernando Ruiz Miniatures. Thank you. The Hatter 13. There's a full figure, like 75 millimeter version of this guy too. I think he's the Wanderer or something like that. So that's some figure options. And when I'm going to talk about cases and stuff a little more now, so I will switch views for now. So when I was thinking about this, I realized there's kind of two components to, actually, you know what? I'm going to go back to the other view. There's two components to traveling with your miniatures. One is how you secure the miniature, and then the other is the case. So I'm going to talk about how you secure the miniature first. So I mentioned bubble wrap. And that is something that I often like to use. Now, Scotch tape, a lot of Scotch tape will rip it. I like to use this tape. It's a medical tape that I make my own kind of Breathe Right nose strips. I have like the home version, and I use this stuff for it. But for some reason, I ended up using it to bubble wrap miniatures and found out that you can use it and reuse it, and I like that a lot. But the Magic style tape works a little better too, but if you have the shiny style tape or packing tape, it will usually rip these and then you won't be able to use it very long. Like these are actually pretty worn out. Most of the bubbles are broken. But I will reuse this stuff for a while. And then the other nice thing about this tape is, or a larger piece of tape, I can write on it what the miniature is. So, you know, you would just take these and wrap the miniature in it. But as I mentioned, if I do that with this figure, I haven't really secured the figure. So what I would probably do is have a slightly smaller piece of bubble wrap it around her, and then wrap another piece around the whole thing. And the same thing if you have, I ended up not bringing over I had a diorama with like 2 separate figures. If I had something like that, I would do a similar thing. I'd wrap some bubble wrap around each figure and then bubble wrap the whole thing. It'd be unlikely that I would want to bubble wrap a diorama, but for shipping, it could happen. So bubble wrap is a great solution if, you know, these are the miniature. This is the kind of thing I mentioned it being a problem with this sort of miniature for repeated travel, but for 1 or 2 trips, it wasn't a problem. But fragile resin, there's going to be certain things where it's not a great option, and it's not necessarily the best option for gameplay because you're going to have to unwrap every figure and then rewrap every figure, and that's going to add a lot of time to your packing and then repacking. So just take out all the tools that we use. If you do bring tape, if it's not this kind of tape, you will need to bring scissors. Let me zoom back a little. So I have these little scissors are my convention scissors, really. I have a little bag I bring extra putty, extra scissors, extra tape. I always bring Sharpies. You always end up seeming to need Sharpies at conventions. So before I get to that, another option for miniature storage, zoom out a little more, is foam. And there's all kinds of different foam. So this is foam that has been pre-made into compartments. You can even custom order foam, I believe, like dictating the size of the compartments you need. So this is nice, but it also has its drawbacks. So you can see that this guy doesn't fit in the compartment. And really, even though the figure fits, the weapons don't. And you can see that the repeated stress has caused paint chipping. The other thing I've noticed with these is sharp parts. This is another figure that doesn't really fit in the compartment and the weapon is sticking out. I have a piece of foam with larger compartments. It won't fit under the view. But some of these things, like the little sharp points on his bow or other sharp areas, will stick to some kinds of foam. And then when you pull them out, I've had more paint damage from taking things in and out of this case than I've had from them being used. So Inara is correct that storage is very important because, like this guy always gets stuff. It's going to affect your figures just as much as transportation. So what I had done this, some of these are metal. So I had done this because this is a metal miniature and I just made like a little thing of plastic and I put that in there. So that was bubble wrap. But what I might even do is do something like saran wrap that just, you could even just glue it down in one spot. And then when you put these things in, they're not going to stick to anything and you can take them in and out. This is a much more gaming friendly solution because you can just pull these guys out and put them back. There's different kinds of carrying cases you can get for this, but it's just the idea of foam in general. You can also buy a block of foam if you were shipping or you had, you know, something like my giant lady or something that's a particular shape and size that's more fragile. You can get a block of foam and cut out something, you know, cut it in half and then make the 2 sides, cut out parts so that it exactly encloses the figure. And that's, if you need to ship something that's fragile but awkward shaped, that's a good method to use. You know, kind of like when you buy an appliance or something and it's got that styrofoam that's been form fitted to it, it's a similar idea. Another kind of foam is pluck foam. I don't have an example of that. I sold my case that had pluck foam. But imagine that this was completely flat, but there were squares cut in it. So they're just little squares where each of these things is really attached only at the bottom. You can pull out each of the little segments to make the shape compartment that you want. And that's another way to, you know, if you don't want to cut, like I have never done the foam to exactly match a miniature. I don't think my brain would understand the physics of that well enough. Pluck foam would be much easier for me to handle for that kind of thing. And you can customize that to exactly whatever your warband is or what you use for that particular adventure. You can customize the size of the compartments to fit the exact figures. So I'm probably going to say your name wrong, but Zero Zerez says someone, I don't remember who, perhaps Doug Sundeath on the Reaper Forums, suggested putting minis in sandwich bags if you put them in foam. I think saran wrap could work, or cut the plastic of the bags. But yes, some kind of barrier between the foam and the figure would be all that you need to take care of the potential scratching damage. There's one other kind of foam. I'm going to actually put these somewhere safer. Let me get that case. Am I at maximum zoom? So this is Reaper's current figure case that they sell. Is the small pistol case, and then inside it has waffle foam. So called because it's got kind of, dips and crevices. Now, the waffle foam isn't bad, but so these are all the... Oh, and I was looking for these the other day, and now I know where they are. Sorry. Sidebar. These are the figures that I painted for the Learn to Paint kits. Examples. I actually ended up painting 2 or 3 copies of each figure, so Reaper has a set, and then I have the extras. So I ended up painting 2. I originally painted the pirate like that, and then I painted him like that. Because I would do a test run for each figure, and then do the one where I took the photographs. So the waffle foam, Chewy Boot says, I'm not a fan of the waffle foam. I've ended up with some broken metal mini weapons. I'm not sure I'm a fan of the waffle foam either. This is the problem I notice. So you can see these skeletons are pretty slender. And then this guy is pretty thick in some dimensions. When I close this case and shake it around, the skeletons are not where I put them sometimes when I open it back up. So this may or may not work for your needs, but if your figures are all basically the same size, you can probably make this work. I'm just mentioning it because I'm trying to be thorough about the different options. These are bones, so it doesn't end up being a problem. This is another... For bones, basically, you just want to try to keep them from banging into each other. And I did forget something with plastic wrap when I was there. Because it's kind of partly cases. Where did I put my little plastic wrap mummies? So something I have done with bones is just get a container and put a sheet on the bottom, put my bones on, put another sheet over that, put some more bones on. Really all you need to do is keep them from banging into each other. Because that's what's most likely to damage the paint. So when I had to pack up my studio a couple years ago, have I unpacked? No, I have not. There are some things I couldn't find to show you today. But I use like a big bin. I didn't use one of these. And I just have layers. I have metal miniatures in there too. The problem is, if I want to go in there and take something out, the chance of me being able to do that without kind of disarranging things so that stuff is touching is very low. Talk to you later, Sidway. So that's another option with the quick play option. If all your figures are sturdy plastic, the quick play option with these is just have layers of bubble wrap or flat foam or waffle foam or something in a container, and then you just make sure that you pile enough padding on top of whatever, between the top and the lid, that things aren't moving around, and that you should be good to go, especially for card tricks. Actually, I did so I wanted to start with consider your miniature needs. So that's why I was showing you some of the miniatures. So I mentioned fragile basing materials. I mentioned having fragile or odd shaped weapons or other things that protrude from the figure. When I asked for feedback on this topic on my Facebook page and some other places, and one of the things people mentioned is if you have something that's like on just a little plastic flight stand or something like that, something suspended from a wire, the forces that it would be subjected to in travel are going to be hard to prepare against. So you might want to assemble it there. That will require that you be able to unassemble it to take it back to where it goes. Unless sometimes I'll paint things for Reaper and it just has to get there. I might assemble it at Reaper and then it's in the case and their problem. But that's just something to consider. Then we talked about how many miniatures are you likely to want to transport. The method of transportation is going to be a factor for whether you choose something like foam or bubble wrap that completely encases the miniature. Those are good solutions when you aren't necessarily going to be able to control the orientation. So this thing is full of bubble wrap minis, and it doesn't matter to me if it gets spun upside down or whatever. The options where you make something so it's freestanding on a plate, you probably, unless you're really confident about the method you've used to secure it, you're probably not going to want it to tilt more than like that. So that's another factor to consider. Then your method of travel. I'll talk a little more about, things that happen on a plane, because I imagine that many people are going to be traveling by plane to ReaperCon and other events. You have more control in a car, obviously, unless there's an accident. You can even control you can control it so that they're mostly going to stay flat. So I've seen people travel to, when I was talking about those military shows, they have a lot of like busts and 75 millimeter figures and like big things. And I've seen guys drive up and they just have them in a cardboard box, essentially, where they're kind of separated from each other by the bases maybe, but they're driving so they know that it's not going to be a big problem. So another method to secure miniatures when you start talking about the freestanding, which I'll give you an example of that. I'll bring out the shelf and then show you the case after. Hold on, I want to keep that up here. So what I mean by the freestanding solutions is you will have a shelf and you attach the miniatures to the shelf and then you slide the shelf into a case. Or even the guys who are doing the cardboard boxes, this is the bottom of the box, essentially. And you are working things in such a way that you're assuming either that it's so sturdy you could tip it over, or that the miniature it really just has to survive stuff like that on a plane. So how do you attach things to the shelf? Well, this is actually a metal shelf. So one option is you have metal shelves, and one of the people who responded to my question on Facebook just uses cookie sheets at the bottom of stackable bins for his gaming miniatures. And then you attach miniatures to the bottom, attach magnets to the bottom of your miniatures. My original case that I can't find right now was kind of done on the opposite idea. So the magnets were in the shelf, and I used washers on the bottom. That's why I have this this is the shelf that this really comes with, and then I've attached a piece of plastic card that I've stuck magnets in, because my miniatures have washers on the bottom. Not all of them, but some of them. And you can see that's pretty secure already. Now, what I would do in addition to that is, this is poster tack. A lot of people like blue tack. I have this white putty that I like a lot. So to really make sure, or if the miniature didn't have a magnet, here, let me switch back to the other view. What people like to do is you kind of build it up. First of all, when you use this stuff, make it warm. That's what makes it sticky. Then you kind of put it around the base of the miniature. And you do it from a few different angles so that regardless of how the plane tips or whatever, your miniature is secured. And then even if this didn't have a magnet, this would still stick in. So that's what a lot of people are doing with miniatures that need to stay freestanding. So now there's no pressure on the lamppost the way there was when I was using bubble wrap. You want to test this putty before you take your trip, though. So this is the same putty I use to attach miniatures to little holders. I have a holder, yeah. So if I was attaching something to a holder, this is the same putty that I like to use. Blue Tack is a very popular brand, so I would probably start with that one if you want to test some stuff, if you can get that where you are. wherever you are may dictate different options. So you want to get some of this stuff and work with it. So what I would do is get a miniature, like a heavy metal miniature that I hadn't painted, and I'd put it on, I'd knock up my storage solution and use my putty and tip it over and jostle it and shake it around and make sure that it worked on something like that before I put my painted miniatures on it. So the putty, I don't know if we're going to be able to see this. Sometimes the putty will leave a little ring, or you won't be able to get it all off. You just make sure it's warm and then you touch it to the surface. So this is poster tack so that you can put things up on your dorm room walls or whatever, and you're not ruining the paint. So the whole idea of this is that it doesn't ruin paint. You can also use this as a mask for airbrushing. Slightly cheaper to use silly putty, I think, but silly putty isn't as sticky, so it's easier to use. Like, if I wanted to airbrush or dress, but I didn't want to get stuff on the skin because I already painted it, I could kind of work out a piece of putty and put it on. And then once you take it off, it's covered in paint. It probably isn't as sticky anymore, but that is a bonus thing with putty. So another method, this is out of production putty that I ordered a bunch of off Amazon because I am insane. Trash Rama says he sticks the putty up his nose when he airbrushes. It's better than not wearing a mask and airbrushing. Ask me about the time I blew my nose and it came out all red because I was painting red dragons. So when I found putty I liked, I went out and bought a bunch of it because apparently it was out of production. And I still have one package left of the original 4. So I was taking this putty, I meant to put some in my little box of securing methods and I forgot. This putty came from the bottom of my case because just like I said, bring extra tape or bubble wrap or whatever, bring extra putty because maybe you're going to buy a super cool resin bust while you're at the convention and you want to add something to your case. Or something happens to the putty that you use to secure your figures. You want to have extra of that stuff. Another method of attaching things to the shelf is, so some of these I don't, that one does have a washer on. Let's see. I bet this guy doesn't have a washer on. So there's not a washer on the bottom of that, and I would have wanted to do that before I started to paint the miniature because what if whatever I'm cutting into here slips and gets the figure? So what I might do instead is use this mounting tape. This again is a solution that I use with just putting miniatures on holders to paint them. And I know this is 3M. I don't know if it's available all over the world. I know in America it is very commonly available. I have found it in the pharmacy, in the big box store, in the grocery store, in the hardware store. So it's sticky on both sides, and there's like a little bit of foam in between there. And that's kind of what helps you because if either side that you're securing isn't exactly flat, it helps account for that so that stuff sticks better. This is also a very strong adhesive. In fact, it is so strong that when I do this, if I brought this miniature to ReaperCon, because I actually finished it in an imaginary world, and I had them stuck on there, so I would stick them on there. I'd cut pieces of this off. I'd probably cut 2 pieces off, stick them on there. I would still do the putty around here because I am paranoid. But this stuff is so strong, once I got there, I would probably have to take a tool like this and pry it under the tape to get it up. So that is something to consider for that option. But I do like this stuff. And then to bring extra is tough because it's in the roll like this. Like it's only got the stuff you remove on one side. So it's hard, and you don't want to waste the sticky, like you don't want to break down the stickiness. So you kind of have you probably would buy a smaller roll than this. I ended up buying a bigger roll because I know how much I use. But sometimes when it gets to the end, I keep it to throw in my convention bag. But then you have to have the scissors again. So I think, let's see, we did blue tack, mounting tape, foam, bubble wrap, smooth plastic. So the one option that I don't have to show you, but is a great option, is another thing you could do if you had a wood shelf, or here I've made my own home shelf. You could put a screw through there. So imagine putting a screw through the shelf, and it comes out the other side. And then you put, what did they call it? A wing nut or a stop nut on this end, and then you are literally screwing this down and assuming that you've attached it well to the base, it is not going anywhere. And I know people that have shipped things that way, as well as just having them set up in their miniature cases. So if you are handy enough to do that, that is probably the most secure method you could find. So just straight magnets, I mean, I guess there are people who use it. So this is table war, and I'll show the case in a minute. There's other variations of this. I guess there are people who just use the straight magnets. Those, I think they're called neodymium magnets. They're really strong little magnets on this and fly with it. I've never flown where I didn't also have the putty backup. So if you want to travel with warband or army type amounts of figures, you may want to consult with someone, to take a poll on a Facebook group or forum or Discord channel that you're on, and ask other people who play that same game and travel to conventions, what do they do to secure their miniatures? Is just putting them on magnets enough if you're on a plane? It's probably enough if you're in a car. Is it enough if you're on a plane? That I don't know. All right, so now I will show you some container options. And so all the things I just talked about, the putty and the blue tack and double-sided tape and stuff like that, those are kind of the internal securing methods. So now I want to talk about the containers you use those within. So these are just pencil boxes that I get for like $1 or $2, but they're hard-sided. This is my favorite option if I have the option and the figures work. So Rex FTW says, my brother and I use table war and go to events all the time on planes, and it works great with just magnets. So that is fantastic. So I will put extra bubble wrap on top if the lid isn't flush, because the goal is you want to be able to shake this and nothing moves, and you're actually hearing something move, but I'll explain that in a minute. Because those are my bones. So little bones I will just stick in there. As long as they're not touching anything and they're basically restrained. That's all it needs. So these are figures that I will bring to like classes for demonstrations and stuff. So some of the bones things I've done I will take better care of. But most of the things that I put in here are for classes. So these are bones too, but I wrap them up. And I will do this too. If the miniature, and I'll do this even on metal miniatures, if it's on a fairly compact base, I will spiral them in. So it's not just one miniature per cocoon. It's a never-ending array of Sarah the Seeress with fancy hair. So yes, these are the figures I was mentioning. There's a hair video that I've done for Reaper, and then I've got a guide that goes along with it on my blog, and there you'll see reference pictures to these figures, and then one of them is the one I painted on the stream, and then one of these is the one I painted as a demo before that. Because the way the camera used to be set up, we could not really see what we were doing on camera. So what I will do with these pencil cases is I carry a backpack instead of a purse most of the time. But even if I didn't, I would probably carry a backpack to conventions, and I'll throw the figures or throw the pencil cases at the bottom of my backpack. So I might have one or a stack of two, and they're at the very bottom because I'm not going to need to access them while I'm on the plane. I've only ever had airport security ask about them once. There was just the things, I'd packed the things inside in such a way that it looked like the shape of an arrowhead. Now, why you can't bring an arrowhead on a plane if it's just an arrowhead and it's not attached to an arrow and it's only this big, I don't know. But they did ask me to kind of, I rearranged the contents of my bag, and then it was all fine. Trash Rama says the hair class is on YouTube now. Yes, it is. And in fact, it was only ever on YouTube, I think, because it was from before Reaper did all the streaming stuff. So, well, I think they had started to do Reaper Live, but back when it wasn't live. So here are two metal miniatures where I've done the same thing. So these are Dark Sword miniatures. These are for my in-person hair class, just showing different colors of hair. I'll zoom a little. So I just wanted to show that you use the same principles with different colors of hair. Jameis21 says, I cut up the Reaper Kickstarter 5 box to craft a makeshift minis display case and I have a place to keep them in the short term. If you are handy, there are lots of options you can have. And unfortunately, I don't have my handmade case. My husband and I spent some time searching, and we did not get there. But I have pictures of it, so I will be showing my iPad briefly. And this also does work for miniatures on bases. So you can see that I kind of put the bubble wrap around the figure a little bit before I started wrapping up the base. So this is another class miniature, so this base is really just a handle so that I can pass it around the class and people don't have to worry about dropping it or whatever. This miniature's been here on years. So this is that mounting tape, the double-sided mounting tape. That's how it's good stuff. I don't worry about it with metal miniatures or even big metal miniatures. I'll use bigger strips of it with big metal miniatures. And if you use it with bones, you can often pop the bones off and put another one on and reuse it multiple times. So I don't know if there's anything else cool to see in here. This miniature is about prep. Okay, I remember what this is now. I end up not talking about this as much, but I should probably do a stream about this. So I've kind of circled all the areas that I would address before painting this figure. So it's mold lines, but it's also, you get like this pebbly kind of surface sometimes on metal miniatures. And even though she has that staff that's sticking out like that, I haven't had a problem. I've been hauling this one around for years. So I have like 6 or 7 of these things, and I just change out what the figures that I'm taking to that event are, and then I leave them stored in here the rest of the time. But you can see what I said about writing on them. So I know this is something monochrome, so I think I know what it is. Right, I have a couple of so this is monochrome. It can be black and white, but in this case I think I used the Twilight Blue Triad. It's Twilight Blue, Snow Shadow, and Midnight Blue, I think, and then black and white. And then this one is more of a speed painted one, and that's like different tans and beiges. But you use kind of the same value. I moved my value strip for this one, but you use the same value of colors or the same value range, and you just change what you're putting on the miniature depending on what you want the surface to look like. That didn't make a lot of sense. Someday I'll address that more. Trash says you got to prep them minis before you paint them. That is 100% true. Paul John's Life says you have them in bubble wrap. No worries about rubbing paint off of minis. Any packing materials that should be avoided either for travel or shipping with painted miniatures. So I have been doing this for years, and I've never noticed problems from bubble wrap. Sometimes people use tissue, and I feel like tissue or paper towel is more likely to scratch paint off or stick to things than the bubble wrap or a smooth plastic would be. If I were worried about the bubble wrap, I would probably use saran wrap first and then wrap them in bubble wrap. Now, the one caveat would be if your miniatures are at all sticky, neither plastic nor tissue is going to be a great option because they're going to stick. But this is my preferred method. I have transported fancy contest miniatures this way. If I can, I want to do this because I can just put it in my backpack. I don't have any additional luggage, and I don't have to think about it because I have left carrying cases in like the restroom or under a table after I eat at the restaurant and then had to go running back halfway through the airport. So I like to minimize my stress level and use this method if I can. So I've used bubble wrap for shipping as well. Cyberstorm says, I would think any paper product would have a slight sandpaper effect on a painted miniature. I would think that too, but I know people who recommend using like bath tissue and stuff. And just the dust and the potential scratching. I've never had a problem with bubble wrap. Now I get this small kind, usually, and I just get half of this might be stuff that I got shipped in packages from Amazon. I have occasionally had to go out and buy a roll at Staples or whatever. Now I do this with these cases. And, hold on. Am I zoomed out? Yeah. I don't consider this securing method, like that could easily get opened in my backpack. So I usually use an additional rubber band and one that is springier than that. So this one has probably been in my drawer for a very long time. So I do want to make sure the closure closes as well. But I just that now you can't, we'll talk about things that happen at the airport, but like I said, I've only ever had problems at one time. Oh, this is one other thing I do with this. So I cut extra pieces of this tape instead of bringing a whole roll. I cut extra pieces of this tape because I know it will stick and re-stick. And I put them up here. So if something happens, or often, if I'm going to Reaper, they might hand me a resin or a 3D printed figure that it's pretty fragile that I want to pack up in here. And then I have extra bubble wrap from securing the top, and I have extra tape to wrap it around. Paul Johns, I've said, thanks. I have the old Ralpartha Anniversary Dragon, and with moving it a few times, I've got some wear on the paint on the wingtips, as well as a wing that came off, which is a whole different problem. They're pointy bits. Sometimes there's no avoiding it with pointy bits. So I haven't really noticed it happening from bubble wrap. I've seen it happening more from handling while I'm painting it, or just putting it places or whatever. With metal miniatures, it's just you really want to get the surface clean, and then before you fix it, like get a little bit of rubbing alcohol and just rub it over the parts that have been rubbed off. Then put brush on primer on, then put your paint on, and hopefully that will help the repair stick a little more. So I'm just looking for like a more sensible place to put that. Actually, I'll talk about the shipping a little bit too. If I were shipping, I would like to do a similar thing. So I like to do a box within a box. So this might be my box, and then it goes in a bigger box. It happens that I drink a lot of tea, and I have a bunch of these tea containers. So I've started packing miniatures in here. Not in this one because it's still got tea debris. But I'll bubble wrap them, stick them in here, then stick this in the box. If this were a cardboard box instead of a tin, I would also bubble wrap the box and then put it in the other box. So your goal is you want to be able to shake your first container and not feel anything moving around, not hear anything moving around, so that the miniature is completely immobilized in there. So I'll wrap it in bubble wrap, but I might like stuff extra bubble wrap in the top or bottom or around the box. This tea is really good, by the way. If you haven't tried it, this is very delicious. Then I'll do the same thing. I will wrap that box and packing stuff in the second box to make sure that when I close that, it doesn't move around. One of the things that was mentioned that I guess I've never really thought about in shipping when I asked the question on my Facebook page was somebody said, make sure you put it in a baggie or something similar like that in case it gets wet. And I guess because I've used the bubble wrap, I've never really thought about that. But that is something to consider. I do put tape all over I usually write the labels on an index card and then take them to the box, and I will tape the whole thing so that in case my ink wasn't waterproof and some water got on that box, the mail person can still see the address to deliver it to. But I don't ship a ton of miniatures, but I've never had any issues with the ones I've shipped. Now, to be fair, I haven't shipped something like the dragon that Paul John's Life is talking about. That is one of the cases where you might want to get pluck foam or foam you can cut and make it exactly the shape of the object, because for something that you are shipping, you need to be sure that you can do that and someone can throw a bunch of stuff on top of this, because you have no control over how the package is going to be treated in shipping. Samurai Jack 325 says some miniature companies used to send their resins in similar round containers and bubble wrap in a box. The box within a box, I think, is a very good method. Paul John's Life said he never shipped the dragon. No, I know you were talking about moving house, but sometimes people do have commissions and sales of awkward large size miniatures, and that's something to consider, is how are you going to secure it while getting it to the customer. What else do I have? So when I talked about the shelf system, I used a different kind of jar, but there was one Gen Con that I went to that I had like one little fragile resin miniature. So I didn't want to bring my whole case. I'm not even sure that I had a case. I probably did. But what I ended up doing, it wasn't a mason style jar. It was some kind of jar that we'd worn out. So it had a standard lid. This would be better probably. So what I did was I took that double-sided tape, I stuck the miniature down, and then I closed the jar on top of it so it was kind of like in a force field. We were traveling by car for that event. I don't know if I would do the same thing for a plane. I might. I mean, if I could. Well, I didn't actually stick them down, so it didn't work. But basically, you get the idea. It would be all in there in a little force field, and nothing's going to bother it. Where this is nice, where the mason jar would work better than the other jar, is the problem I had is that then the figure was stuck under a rim. So I had to it was hard to pry it off. Where this way, it would just be attached on a flat surface, and it'd just be like getting it off the shelf. If you had a compact enough guy, even just something like this would work. And this is that double-sided tape. You stick him there. I don't think he is compact. Oh, maybe he is. So if you have medicine bottles, they also make nice little force fields, but you have to have fairly compact miniature where they aren't sticking their weapons and stuff out all over the place. And these are nice if you're working on miniatures because you can have it like this when you're painting it and then flip it around and put it in a force field when you're not painting it. But the full shelf style, well, let me get rid of the miniatures that are sitting out so that nothing gets damaged. Well, I fling giant boxes around. All right, I will go to the phone view, and I may end up moving the phone. Okay, well, that was not as bad as it sounded. So that was just, I should have showed you that one before I dropped it on the floor. You can also get something called a small tool case. Yes, Cyberstorm says plastic dice boxes, so if you have those square dice cubes, those work really well for the force field thing because you can switch the lid either way. So I mentioned using pencil boxes. There's also something called small tool boxes, small tool storage, something like that. It's like a mini briefcase, so it's like metal. And I had one of those that I've now thrown on the floor. I put oil paints in it, but you could put wrapped miniatures in it too. So this is my tableware case, and this is the compact version. So I believe this is the smallest one they make. And it's hard to see in the front there, but they have a nice feature where you can take the whole door off. So when you're at a convention and you're just moving around, you can show people your stuff pretty easily. And this lid lifts up as well. So I'm not trying to make this an ad for tableware. They're just the option that I'm most familiar with. They also make these in army style. So mine is maybe a warband or for a display artist. This thing with the shelf, I left it that way because that is really easy to do, actually. So you can have multiple shelves that I'm not putting on there. So you can see that you have room to decide where you want to put the shelf, how you want to put it in. There's a little drawer even that you can slide in the bottom there that I literally have never used. So I mostly just use one shelf. But if you played a skirmish style game, this might be all you need. But they make much bigger versions of this. The thing I will say about this, and this comes back to knowing your needs. So I live in Knoxville, and it's just a regional airport, so I'm always traveling on the tiny little planes. This is literally the biggest thing that I could bring. I could not bring a bigger case than this. I have to put this lengthwise like this into the overhead compartment, and you would have barely any foot room sliding it under chair ahead. So if there's at all a possibility that you would be traveling on that kind of plane, that is something to consider, because if you had the large style tableware case and it didn't fit, they would make you check that plane side. So your miniatures would be going into the luggage hold with all the luggage that gets thrown around and everything, which would literally be a nightmare. So that is just something to be aware of. So this style of case was preceded, I think, by wooden cases that people made themselves. So I think this is like they were inspired by that and they decided to make cases like that. And more people make them now. I think when I was online, some of the ones I saw look like they have the frame is soft and then the exterior casing is like a plastic or something soft, but it's got a metal frame and where the shelves fit in and stuff. So there's all kinds of variations on this. A lot of people are doing it now. Back in the day, it was like nobody was doing it, and handy people made wooden cases, and then a few people like me were able to commission handy people to make wooden cases. So this is an example. Let's see if I turn this off. So this is an example of a wooden case, and this is slightly more compact than what I showed you. If you have that wolf, you can kind of get a size indication. And here you can see my original shelf. The shelf is fitted up with magnets instead of being a metal shelf, which is why I have this weird Frankenstein thing. And then this is what it looks like closed. So if you're at all handy, this is a great option that you might want to consider, is making your own case. Sidwi says it's such a cute case. She loves wooden boxes. It is very cute. And I was able to get it to be nice and small so that I was sure that it fit on the plane. And I typically don't have a lot of miniatures, so this was enough for me. The thing I like about the other case, apart from sometimes, because of like this year, since it's been so long since I've been to Reaper, I'm worried that the figures I have to bring them won't fit in that other case even. But that clear door it really gives me peace of mind. Now, I think you have the choice. I got this in their Kickstarter. So I don't know if the options are a bit different when you order them off the store. But that clear door. So on the Kickstarter, you could choose whether you wanted a clear door or an opaque door. And I'm like, I very much want a clear door. And I've had TSA agents who looked in and said, oh, so they either know what it is or they can see that a lot of effort went into it and they treat it a little more thoughtfully. Now, I almost always get swabbed, which I'll circle back to things that happen at the airport. But they at least get what it is to a certain extent. And it also cuts down. I've had people ask me the weirdest questions. So I opened that wooden case once because I'm paranoid. So when I get through security, I'll like often open the door and look at the miniature. So that's the other nice thing about the clear door, is that I can be paranoid without having to open things. But I stopped at the Starbucks and got a drink, and then I sat down and I opened the door, and the guy beside me started freaking out because he thought I had a hamster or something in there. And I'm like, yes, I'm about to let a wild animal run all over the airport. That's exactly what's happening. One option I didn't mention was this is a Chessex case. I do have one of these. I also couldn't find it. My husband and I were like running around yesterday looking for stuff in our very disastery basement. We had renovations and we had a flood, and we're just taking forever to get over it. This is really scale for 25 millimeter miniatures, like the old school 25 millimeter miniatures. They may do one with larger compartments. It's nice in that it's very compact and you can just throw it in your game bag or your luggage or whatever, but you would need to either custom make the foam or see if they have one with larger squares, because you can barely fit any modern miniatures in there at all. But I did want to, so I'm going to do a blog entry for this, and I will have links to all the ones. I'm sorry. Paleo's AppHub says someone brought a squirrel on a plane I was on a few weeks ago. It happens. They didn't let it loose, though, did they? Like, there was a squirrel on the plane, but the squirrel was contained in some kind of animal enclosure. Because I did check in behind a goat once. The goat was going on the plane. The guy wasn't. Just the goat took the trip. So I don't know. That was a very famous special goat or something, I guess. So this is nice in that it's a nice hard plastic case and it's compact, but you probably would want to fix the foam up a little. So I think those are the ones I had pictured up. But as I was saying, I'm going to write a blog entry, and I will write down or have links to the companies I found that sell all kinds of case options. There's actually a lot of stuff on Amazon even. The thing is, it is one of those, it becomes a money thing. So a lot of the stuff I was looking at, everything kind of started at $50, and a lot of it went well north of that. So you also have to consider your budget, I guess. What else do I have? Let's see. I'll come back to the bigger view. So I've seen wood cases at like Joann's or those kind of stores, or maybe there's plastic stuff. So it's some kind of mini briefcase. And like I was saying, I think if you look for tool cases on Amazon, you'll see a similar thing. This is actually one that my stepfather just found somewhere. And what was interesting about it, but I'm showing it for those of you who are handy, is that it has compartments. So whoever he found it had already fixed it out like this, or it was sold this way. But back in when I bubble wrapped things, but I had too many to stick in my backpack, I used this a few times to travel with as well. So that's a nice hard-sided case. And you could do something similar with foam as well, create your own solution. Paleo said they got kicked off when the airline learned about the squirrel. I think if it was in a case, it would be fine. I mean, in a, whatever we call the things we put animals in. I showed you the Reaper one. This is from Kickstarter 2, Kickstarter 1, I don't even remember. But this is what my foam that I showed you before was in. And I saw some pistol case options. So you see I'm fixing the guys because they don't 100% stick. Now I think if I did that, and that guy was stuck to the foam. If I did the thing with the little bubble wrap kind of envelopes in there, it'd still be pretty easy to get them in and out, but I think that would protect them and keep them from moving around. But there are bigger square examples of foam as well. I've never traveled with this one because this is more than I personally would be likely to take to an event, but that might be exactly the right answer for some of you. Okay, so let me just... So when I talked about the plastic containers where somebody stuck like a cookie sheet down to it, those were stackable containers, and you can get those at the craft store too. So that's a nice option if you play games, and then you can have different, maybe by module or by unit or something, and then just change out which stack you're taking to your event. Sorry, I make my own run sheets. And this was a 2-page one. So I will mention some brands, but I'm going to have links to these on my thing. Maybe I should bring back miniatures so you have something to look at while I talk about this. Her. That one. And I think if I put him down. There we go. Zoom in. You can enjoy some miniatures while I yammer. And now I don't remember what I was saying. Oh, that's very sad. Clavicus says, I use 3 of those and the vinyl Reaper cases with the modular foam trays. I like the hard plastic cases because they hold 150 minis in 3 trays. Wow, that is pretty good. So some of the brands, and I'll put links to these when I write a blog entry, and they'll probably go up sometime this week. So Table War has these, and they're a little bit heavy, and so are the wood ones. So that's something to consider as well. Like that, the other reason I picked that size is that is about as much as I can carry. V Manaqua says, I saw that you have magnets in your carrying cases. How do you attach the magnets to your miniatures? So the more common way to do it now is to have a metal sheet as the shelf, and then to attach the magnets to the miniatures. So when they're slotted base, that's pretty easy. Where did my slotted base person go? In my case, the first case I bought had magnets on the shelf, and I put the metal on the miniature. So these are metal washers that attach to the magnets in my shelf. The more common system is the other one now, where you attach the magnets to the miniature. It's pretty easy when it's a slotted base. It's a bit more of a challenge when it's other kinds of bases. I had one a couple of weeks ago on stream. I showed you guys like a improbably dressed lady who was fighting some skeletons. I had attached one of those metal washers. So she had a wooden base like this, and I had to drill it out. And I attached them with 2-part, like 5-minute epoxy glue. So I assumed they were in there pretty well, because super glue is not, it doesn't have great shear strength. So just to make sure for jostling and stuff, I wanted to use the other stuff, but it popped out the washer anyway. So I don't know if there's a better method for attaching the washer and or magnets. But if you have a solid base, you're going to have to drill it out to get the magnets in there. So I don't know how, if I had miniatures like this, I would maybe have to put the magnet there and build up around it with putty. Or put this on one of those slotted bases. I mean, this is a freestanding base, and Reaper sells bases like this. There's putty underneath it that I filled in for some reason. I don't even know why. So I would glue that on there and then attach the magnets there and then build up additional base work around that guy. Or not. I mean, a plain black base isn't a terrible thing, especially if it's for a game and you don't want to commit to a certain kind of terrain because you want the piece to look more flexible. So there are great possibilities with every option, and there are detractions for every option. So there's no one solution that solves all your problems. You kind of have to find the one that, well, I need easy access to my miniatures, so because you have an army and you're putting them in and out of the case all the time, the magnets are a great option, but then you have that extra step in your prep. Or you have fragile things like this, so you have to find ways to carry them without anything touching the sides. And then those cases are great, but they're heavy and it's something else to carry. And so there's a plus and minus to everything, and it's just you kind of have to figure out which thing meets your needs best. And your needs may change over time. Like I'm showing you all these things. I've used most of these solutions at one time or another. I haven't gone on the plane with every single one of them, but I've used all of them. I mean, the jar was a car trip, so I was also able to wedge the jar, pack around it so that I knew, outside of having an accident, that the jar was going to be mostly upright. But I was mentioning brands. So Table War is the kind of the magician's case. Then Battle Foam is a popular one. Feldherr, Army Case, or armycase.com I think is the website, but A Case is what they usually call their products, I believe. Sabol Designs, Enhance, Case-Matics, KR Figure Cases, and the Combat Company. Now, I don't have personal experience with most of those. Some of those were mentioned by people who responded to my queries on Facebook. Others are things that I found doing a Google search. But I was kind of impressed with how many options there are now compared to the last time I went looking for miniature cases. So where are we? All right, so now let's talk about the actual travel. So the car, if you're traveling by car, that is probably the least stressful, I guess, method. I mean, you're still having to pack everything up and put it in, but you get to do stuff, like I said, where I had a jar and I could pack things around it and control the orientation. Plane travel is a bit of a different thing. And if any of you in the chat have had experiences traveling on the plane with miniatures, feel free to share them. I haven't really had a disaster apart from I have left the case somewhere and then had to run halfway across the airport and go get it back and stuff. And you do have to consider checked luggage versus carry-on. So these class miniatures, I will put these in checked luggage. Nothing in here is an irreplaceable treasure. I would prefer they not get injured and that I don't have to do it again. But I put these things in my carry-on multiple times. I never even noticed that they've been inspected. I've had my bag inspected for hobby stuff, but I think they're more like, what is this weird putty and those things that show up on the x-rays than the little plastic metal and figures. But it's a possibility. I mean, just because it hasn't happened to me doesn't mean it can't happen. When I put them in my carry-on, I acknowledge that it is entirely possible that someone's going to open that up, unwrap all the bubble wrap, and then just throw everything back in, and who knows what's going to happen to it. I think we all know that at no stage in the process is carry-on luggage treated kindly and carefully. They're just tossing things on trucks and then tossing them in the compartment and then tossing them out of the compartment, and then it's coming down that thing for you to pick it up. So you have to be pretty confident that everything is well secured and you're okay with somebody opening that package and possibly not putting things back together well to put something in carry-on luggage. I mean, in check luggage. Carry-on, you do have much more control over it other than the moment that you hand your piece of luggage, your carry-on luggage, to go through security. For many years, I would actually, because usually when you're there and you're taking off your shoes and you're doing the whole dance, there's usually somebody there telling you what to do. And I usually say to that person, look, this thing has very fragile objects in it. If you need to scan it further, that's fine. But could you please ask me about how to open it? Since I got the dedicated cases, and particularly the ones with the clear front, I haven't really done that as much. But that's something you can do. Like, don't get snobby or annoying with them or whatever. And the nicer you are about it, I think the more accommodating they're likely to be. Really, when I pack stuff in the bubble wrap, I just had that one incident where just the metal figures aligned in such a way that it looked like it could potentially be a weapon. And I'm not even sure it was the figure. I think it was the figures plus something else, because they just had me move stuff around in my bag and shoot it through the x-ray again, and then it was fine. So I didn't even actually have to unwrap the miniatures. Paleo's Apep says, I have not yet had any issues with TSA and minis carry-on or checked paints. I put paints in my luggage all the time. I bring extra Ziploc bags just in case. So I always double bag the paints that I put in my luggage, because acrylic paint doesn't come off. So I want to make sure that I don't do that. Nomad Zeke says, I remember on carry-on, I had a loose Calidrax Reborn in my bag, and the agent was like, those are some odd bones, but didn't seem to care beyond that. However, excess amounts of card games will block their scanning and get you pulled aside. That's interesting, because my husband often packs board games and card games, and I don't think we've been called out on weight limits on our check luggage and then had to frantically stuff card games into our carry-on. But I don't think we've been scanned for card games. The one horse, I have a friend who, I think all of the horrible things happened to him on the plane. So he has one of these, and they opened the door, and the shelf was like that, and then it came out. So his miniatures were damaged. So what I might do, if I was worried about that, and since I'm usually traveling through those little regional airports, I'm not that worried, because I can see them checking it. I might shove putty in where it rolls in, just to stop it from sliding out as easily. Or, I think even the putty, the way I have my little Frankenstein system, I think it kind of does that already. But I might do that on purpose, just to slow them down, so that you can say, hello, let me grab that before you go crazy on it. I do get scanned like almost every trip. Like, not every leg of every trip, but at least one leg of every trip I get scanned. I don't know what about me screams drugs and or explosives, but apparently something does. So they've opened the case and they've swabbed inside of it as well as the outside, but they generally do so with care to the contents of it. Ziwa Zirez says, books will block their scanning too, as a warning for those of you who rate bookstores when you travel. Yeah, I could see where that much paper would be pretty dense. Paleo's Apep says, super glue can be problematic traveling. It's technically combustible, so I just buy a small tube if I need something. Yeah, I would not try to bring super glue on a plane, either in carry-on or check luggage. Just go buy those little tubes once you get to your destination. And when you come to something like ReaperCon, there are going to be people who drove or locals, and generally if you have a dire emergency, ask around and see if someone has super glue that they can loan you, because we've all been there, so we're usually pretty understanding and we help each other out. But it's definitely not something I would recommend taking on a plane. And if you have other chemicals that you use in your hobby that you're not confident about, I would check into those before traveling with them. Acrylic paints are fine. You should technically even be able to put them in your carry-on. The agent may or may not agree with you, but they're a water-based paint. So there's no solvents or anything, so that's what you have to tell them. They're water-based stable paint. I think you can even get some kind of paper documentation from, if you contact Reaper, you can get something that you can print out to hand the agent if you have concerns about it. I don't think I've ever put paint in my carry-on, partly just because I don't want to carry it. I've carried watercolors in the cake form, but I probably would not try to mess with tube paints in carry-on luggage, just because if you get the wrong person that's having a bad day and they don't know what it is, they can make you throw it out. But so that's also something to remember. If you get a dedicated miniature case, you have limits in what you can carry. So you get, I think most airlines, you get a personal item and you get a piece of carry-on luggage that fits within the dimensions that they permit. Your miniature case counts as one of those. So if you were planning to not check your, not have a check bag for your clothes and whatever, you have to fit everything. Like, you have to fit your wallet, and like if you take a purse or a backpack or a satchel with your iPad or whatever, all of that stuff then also has to fit in your actual luggage. Or you have to decide that, okay, I've got this miniatures carry case and I still want to bring my backpack with my laptop in it, so I guess I have to check luggage this time. So you have to remember that it is a piece of, from the airport's point of view, it is a piece of luggage. And you need to fit within their requirements. Paleo's APEP says the MSDS sheet, but the concern with carry-on is the amount of liquid still. Yes, I was talking about the type of liquid, but you, even if it's paint, you're still limited to the same, I think it's no bigger than 3 ounces, and it all has to fit in a quart size sandwich bag. Essentially, it all has to fit in a sandwich bag. So you'd only be carrying a very small amount of paint anyway. Studio DKS says, yes, I flew with just 12 bottles of Reaper paint in a gallon Ziploc bag and a carry-on bag, but I have TSA pre-check, which might be a factor. Yeah, I think a gallon is technically breaking the rules, but since you have that TSA pre-check, you could probably fit 12 paints in a quart Ziploc. But then it depends on if you're also trying to get your toothpaste and all of that in there. What else about carrying on? So, and then you have to fit it on the plane. So you have to be able to fit it in the overhead, and accept that, things get shaken around in there. So things have to be secured well enough that it can be shaken around and someone's luggage can, a proper hard-sided, a lot of the little rolly bags are hard-sided now. One of those could be crashing into your miniatures case. And with the wood case and the other case, I've never really worried about that on the, in the overhead bin. I just try to, I like an aisle seat anyway, because I have a tiny bladder. But I try to be springing right up into the aisle to be first into that overhead bin so that nobody's just throwing my crap around. I don't think it would happen, but I don't know anymore. You hear these stories about what people are like on the plane now, and this is going to be a whole new adventure going to ReaperCon this year. But, Paleo's APEP says, yeah, right now between pre-check and COVID, it looks like they're a lot more flexible on the liquids because of hand sanitizer. And yeah, I've been wondering about that because I just have a little bottle of hand sanitizer on my backpack all the time now. Which I would have done even when I go to conventions. I always have hand sanitizer because there was con crud even before there was COVID. But I would usually have that in my check luggage and then take it out again. Take it out for the con. It wouldn't be for travel as much. I just have wet naps or something. So I'm trying to think if I've had any other weird plane experiences, or I know other stories that people have had, or even the other things people have thought I was carrying in my miniatures case. One time someone thought it was cake, and I think that person just really wanted to eat some cake, because I'm like, no, buddy, it's not. Sorry, that'd be one heck of a cake. Although food is certainly something you have to worry about getting through TSA as well. I remember I was I'd gone through security and I was doing the putting your shoes back on part and stuff, and I saw someone else in the security line and they were having an issue because they had packed soup and they thought it was frozen, but then it had thawed, so then it had become a liquid, and it was now an issue. So I didn't quite fill 2 hours. So I don't know. I'll show you guys the miniatures again for the people who came in a little later. And if you have any questions about the miniatures or about travel or ReaperCon, or just kind of, we'll use this as a general opportunity to just exchange thoughts and ask questions, I guess. So for the people who weren't here at the beginning when I first showed this figure, if you would be curious about kind of the thought process that goes into this kind of miniature, you can look up one of the Crow's Nest episodes where I was a guest, I think the most recent one, and I did a deep dive on this with Michael and Jason, where I talked about my inspiration, and I had photos from, so there's some Skyrim inspired stuff here, so I had photos from the game, and then the real places that inspired the Skyrim people. That was kind of interesting to discover that some of that was based on a real place. And so the freehand, I think, was partly based on something from the game, and then the symbols on the little plaques. I didn't wear my ring today, but I have that jingly ring, and those are symbols off the jingly ring. And then this is actually another, I mentioned that other figure, but this is another one where I have a small before and after on some blog page or another, because when I took her to the convention, I decided to do this like 2 weeks before the con, I think 2.5 weeks. It was not enough time. And so that wood grain was not painted on, and I think there was something else I hadn't done. I think I upped the contrast, and the contrast in general on the non-metallic metal, but also the texture. So the freehand was fine, and then the way I painted the cloak, I didn't change any of that. But I changed the leather, and then added, I had always intended to put the wood grain on the staff, but I ran out of time, so I actually did that. But on the thing with Michael, there's a discussion of, I have some of the pages where I worked at the colors to use and how I did color harmony and stuff like that. Any recommendation on a go-to paint palette for travel? I always pack way too much paint because I can never decide. I am not the greatest person at the small number of paints thing. When I'm packing for travel, I usually just, if I had something like this and I want to be able to be sure that I could repair it, I would just pack the paints that I used to paint this. If you look at the 12 paints that I picked out for the Kickstarter 5 Learn to Paint kit, and somewhere there's a picture at the back of the box where it lists the paints, I enjoyed those pretty well. I might add another brown or two. It's weak on like a rusty red brown. And I found that difficult to mix as well. Anne is a better person to ask for that, because probably what you would do is get the clears, white and black, and then the new colors from the Kickstarter, the oxides, so yellow oxide, red oxide, and brown oxide. And that's basically an artist mixing set. You just have to accept that a lot of the colors you're mixing with are somewhat transparent, so you're going to have to add some white and black to shift the opacity a little. But from Reaper Paints, that would be the most efficient mixing set you could have. If I were actually picking out my set, I would probably pick slightly differently just for convenience. So I like Brilliant Red. I'd probably use Brilliant Red instead of Clear Red because it's a little more opaque. There's probably a few other colors. I'd pick a near white, and I definitely would use blue liner. If I had to choose between blue liner and black, I would pick blue liner. Or another off black, but I like the off-whites and the off-blacks enough that I would pack, unless I was really constrained in the amount that I could bring, I would pack those as well as white and black. Do I varnish my minis for competitions? I hardly varnish my minis at all. So Sidway asked this question. The last mini that I varnished was the one that I sent to you guys, and that's probably the only miniature I've varnished in years. So if I know it's going to get heavy use in gameplay, I will candy coat it, so I'll gloss varnish and then matte varnish. But when they call sealer clear coat, that is very accurate. You're essentially just putting on another coat of paint. It's just clear. So to my mind, it's more important to do good prep. So that's washing the miniature, giving the primer time to cure, giving the paint time to cure before you're handling it. And that is something I have a blog article on. If you go to that address and look for, I think it's how to paint a miniature that will survive the apocalypse or at least a minor fall. That has kind of my 7 steps, and the sealer is the last step. So years ago, I would have to test again, but years ago I felt like I was seeing color changes just on the base rims when I was sealing miniatures. So I'm like, well, if it's changing the base rims, it's probably changing what I painted, and I'm a fairly subtle painter, so I disliked that idea enough that I stopped varnishing. Don't tell Ron he thinks I varnish all the miniatures for Reaper. He clearly never watches the show because I say this like every other episode. He's never called me on it yet. Paleo says his paint case holds 60. I tend to pack 3, want to keep it to 1. I would be able to narrow down to 60, I think. I would look at colors that I use a lot and find flexible. Like, you can shift skin tones a lot, so if you had 2 or 3 skin tones, that would probably be enough. And then you mix some browns in, or you mix some other things in, and you can shift it a little bit. So I'd kind of have, I would still be able to get a lot of my go-to colors in 60, and then kind of have the mixing set on top of that. So, and when the reason I had this out for this episode is this is a resin version. This isn't a bones version because this was one of the master copies. So this stuff, I mean, it's because she's a giant, it's actually fairly thick, but it's not attached on the bottom. So I wouldn't want to pack this with bubble wrap. This is one of the ones where I had to think about freestanding solutions. And then she's also an example of not thinking about stuff very well, because so this is the case. She, even if I put this shelf on the bottom rung, she is too tall for that. So I don't know if you'll be able to see it on the video. Let me see if I can. So if you look on the bottom, and if it looks all torn up, which I'm not sure it's obvious on the video, that is because I had to double-sided tape her to the bottom of my case and pull her off because she was just that little bit too tall. So once I have, if you don't have a storage system yet, think about the miniatures that you want to transport and which storage system is going to work for that, or which transport system. Once you do have a transportation system, you kind of want to think about the limitations of your transportation system when you're designing your miniatures. And that's what I was originally going to do this show closer to ReaperCon, and then I'm like, maybe I should do it now, so if people want to order something online, they have time to order it and receive it. This guy is from a workshop that I took with Fernando Ruiz, and his company makes the miniature. But the reason I included him partly in this particular discussion is this is not an advised method of attaching your miniature to a base. Now, this happened because I did the workshop at a show, and I wanted to put him in the show, and a very kind friend had this nice plastic base available, so we just drilled a hole and used a paper clip, and then to get it home, I think I just put that, I think in the show even, it was just spinning around, but to get him home I added the putty. But as a judge, I will tell you that we are trained to pick the miniature up like this. So if you have not attached your miniature firmly to the base, first of all, that's going to be problematic for travel, but secondly, it could potentially, we've had this happen at the MSP Open, I'm not going to lie, where we've picked something up and it just slid right off. And it's a nightmare for us as well as for you. Like, I've literally, the few times that I've injured someone else's miniature, I have like PTSD flashbacks about that for years. Cyberstorm asks, could you put a metal plate on the bottom and then put magnets on the bottom of the miniature? Possibly, but I had already, that would still require planning ahead because I would have to drill out before I put a lot of work into the miniature, so I didn't risk damaging it after I had already finished stuff. So that would have been a smart thing to do that I did not do because I didn't think about it in advance. So that's probably why I'm having this show now, is so that if you are thinking of a fancy, elaborate entry for the MSP Open, first of all, I look forward to seeing that. But second of all, also think about how you're getting it there before you finish doing all of the stuff. So this one I had pulled out for this particular episode to make the point of, if I were just, I mean, I would have no problem bubble wrapping yours. There's nothing poking out. It's a metal miniature. But I would take the step of bubble wrapping her and then bubble wrapping the whole thing, because the base is so much thicker than she is that she wouldn't really be protected by bubble wrap if it was just on the exterior. And this is Catelyn Stark from Dark Sword Miniatures, in case anyone's wondering. They have a whole line of George R. R. Martin based. Their figures are based on the books, not on the TV show, because they actually put out figures before the TV show, and all of the designs are approved by George R. R. Martin, I believe. But I liked her and wanted to paint her. I think I painted her sister also, and that's in the Dark Sword collection. This is another example of not thinking it through. So to me, this miniature is right side up because of how the document camera works. So it looks funny to you, but you can see that there's that piece moving around. And so when I tilt her, it's not going to look right because gravity should be pulling that down, but it's not. So the idea of that was that was an incense sensor, and it's on a real chain that I slid through the figure's hand, I think. So when I travel with this, because you can see it's knocking into the back, one or the other of those pieces could get scratched. So when I travel with this, she's in a freestanding case. She's got the magnet on the bottom. I did think about that for this one at least. So even though it's freestanding, I wrapped a little piece of bubble wrap around that part. And then I also accepted that every time I traveled with it, the paint would flake off of right here, and I would have to reattach it. Oh, I forgot to mention something. When I was talking about the deep dive, Derek, he may still be on, he did one previously with on the crow's nest as well. So you can get some other people's point of view on how you think about and plan for more elaborate miniatures. And this is another one of the figures that after I brought her home from the first contest that she was in, I realized that she no way had enough contrast. So there are pictures of her on some of my contrast blog entries with the before and after. The non-metallic metal, I changed a lot. The dress and the hair, I changed a lot. This I don't think I repainted at all. And the breadsticks, like, I totally looked up baked bread, like the bottom of baked bread. So this part that no one will ever see is probably the best painted part of the miniature, because it's very authentic what bread looks like. So I don't think I changed the bread when I did some of the stuff. I did add some more highlights to the peppers. So this is one of those cases I was painting it pretty close to the event. I added more contrast on that, on the pumpkin on there. And I thought there was plenty of contrast. And then when I came home from the event and it sat in my case for a few weeks, it became much more apparent to me that no, it did not. So if you can, work on your entries now and give yourself some time to put them away. And then after a week or two, bring them back out again. Maybe take some pictures as well. Look at them in a mirror. There are a lot of different ways to kind of try to see your figure through new eyes. And that will help you see some of that stuff on your own sometimes. Especially if you're trying to start seeing it and push your contrast. This is another Dark Sword figure. I think she's called Elf Avatar. Something like that. But that was that figure and the giant, I don't typically take them to conventions anymore because they are travel challenged. Let's see. So these ones are examples of ones that I stopped liking to wrap in bubble wrap because they have. So you could if you look at it from the side, you can see that there's still a little bend in the lantern from one of my last trips. Although the last time I traveled with this, it was freestanding. I added the washer. Nowadays, you would do a magnet, but my old case was set up to have the magnets on the shelf and use washers on the figure. And this, of course, is a Sophie. This is Bourbon Street Sophie, who is one of my favorites. And I do, even though this is a really old piece, I still like it. And this is something that will happen to some of you sometimes. You'll take something to a contest or a show like the MSP Open. In this particular case, I went to the World Expo, which is an open show they only do every 3 years, and it really is people from all around the world. And in those, you enter a number of different figures, and the judges choose which one they want to judge in the category, which is the same as at ReaperCon. And I like those because I'm not always great at making, like how I said, how do I choose just 12 paints? It's a similar thing. How do I just choose one figure to put in this contest? But I had selected 4 figures, I think, that I wanted to enter in the painters category. And then I'm like, I think I showed my display. I did like a test display, and I showed it to Michael, and he said, I feel like you should throw one more in. Like even numbers aren't great, which is true. In art, it's often better to do odd numbers, like use a color in 3 different places or have 3 different objects in a still life, that kind of thing. So I just grabbed this one. I'm like, well, I've always liked her, and even though she's not like the newest, fanciest thing I've done, I'll throw her in. This is the piece they judged and awarded me a medal on. Now, I think part of that is that I think that even though it was fantasy category, I think it was judged by a team that was probably a little more familiar with historical. And I think this was the most, if you take away the wings, it kind of looks like a historical figure. So I suspect that was part of the reason they picked this figure. But it was a weird moment for me because I think even at the time, the figure was 8 years old. So it was like, have I really not improved in 8 years? Is this the best thing I've ever done? Is that what there's like? It was this weird moment. And you'll have things like that, especially in a show, because the judges will often pick a thing to judge that you don't think is your best thing. Like maybe it didn't feel hard to do, or you did a fancy technique on something else. So you assumed that they would look at that one. And we're always choosing in your favor. We're choosing the figure that we're going to assess the best, that we think is the best demonstration of your skills and imagination. And sometimes a figure that didn't feel hard to you is because you're using skills that you already mastered. So something needs to be done well. It doesn't have to have non-metallic metal or OSL or whatever you think of as a flashy technique. It doesn't necessarily have to have one of those for us to think that it's well done and interesting and to look at, and that you made great color selections and displayed your skill to your best talents. So I do still like her. I thought it was a little weird because I think I brought this giant to that. I'm like, really? You picked this one instead of this one? Because part of the reason I brought this one is a lot of times they look at larger scale things. Like this to them is very tiny. The first Atlanta show I went to, I went with Ali Liu, and they called us the girls who paint the tiny ones. I was like, okay, if that's tiny in your mind, but like they're 6mm too. We can go tinier. So, and this is another example of one that, why is she not going in focus? Let's try zooming in and out and see if we can wake the camera up. I'll go back out. This is a very thin piece, so I would be reluctant, even though it's metal and it's pretty sturdy, and even the basing is pretty sturdy, which sometimes the basing is more fragile than the miniature. I would be reluctant to do this one in bubble wrap, and that's why she has the washers under her. And this is another dark sword, but I do not remember what she's called. It's an Elmore figure, and it's based on a piece of art. I want to say Castle of Magic or something like that, but remembering the names of things is maybe not my big area. But this is if you've watched the show regularly, I talk about doing tests and experiments, and I think I actually painted the sleeves and the bodice of this to demonstrate how to paint transparent cloth to someone else. So this was just a little demo mini, and then I decided to finish it up. And eventually I entered a contest with it. So it doesn't always have to be a side project or a waste of time. I'm putting that in those. It's not a waste of time to do practice and experiments, which is a big mental problem that I had to work through when I was starting to learn to paint. I always felt like if it didn't end up in a finished figure, I was wasting time. And that is really, I actually held myself back more with that attitude than then I did myself a favor. This is another figure that I noticed after several. I like to bring him to my skin classes to demonstrate an example of dark skin. And then I think there was a companion. This was like a cool dark skin, and then I had a companion figure that was a warm approach. But this staff, after a while, with the bubble wrap, I could see it bending back and forth, and I was afraid it would break off, so I stopped bringing him. And when I did the warm and dark skin examples, I looked at pictures online and kind of matched some colors to them. Zero says the previous mini was the power female elven mage with staff. Thank you. I always just go through the catalog and look for them when I don't remember their names. Who else do we have? So this one, the basing is pretty sturdy, but it is an example of sometimes how, like, these are all metal figures, and this is maybe a little bit fragile, but not a lot. But these are probably the most fragile part of the piece. And if you use like the paper flowers or like brass etched foliage, or even just foam or plastic foliage, sometimes that is the most fragile part of your figure, and something that you have to take into consideration when you're traveling with it. And there are basing materials that I would not use on gaming figures and would only use on display miniatures, and vice versa. But I did the magnet thing on that one, so it could be freestanding. Are these mechanized warthogs? Yes, they are souped up racing pigs. They did not come that way. This is one of the few occasions where I've done like conversions in sculpting. But the pieces, the wheels, and I think that part, all the parts other than the ropes and the straps, I think they are from Kinder Egg toys. So, those flowers are cloves. Good eye, Nomad Zeke. Yep. I drink tea, and like sometimes I drink some different kinds of herbal tea and stuff. That was probably from chai tea. And some of them I will keep and dry out the leaves and use them as scatter and stuff. But the one tea, I think one time I had loose leaf tea and I was looking at the clothes and I'm like, those kind of look like flowers. So I kept them, and then I thought they went with this kind of swampy look well. This is an example of, and now, I'm wondering how I did transport this, because I think I brought this figure to a convention long before I had any cases and stuff. So it is possible that I did bubble wrap this at one point, but this is just foam. This is pretty fat, and I glued these little flowers on, and then glued fallen petals underneath them. And then there was also, I put together a bouquet with like real dried flowers, and then I used different things for leaves. And I'm not sure if I ever glued it. I think I must have glued it down because I put it in a contest. But eventually it wore off. So this is actually a tribute piece to the sculptor of the figure. Dennis Mize sculpted this figure, and I don't think he sculpted any of the Dark Sword figures that I'm showing. No, he might have done this one. I think he did this one. But he died just before this, and so this was sculpted as a tribute to him. So this is... The official name of this is Dina Honors Her Creator. And so when I was showing the hair miniatures before, this was kind of my breakthrough figure for hair. I've been trying to figure out how to do hair in a more realistic way. And it's not perfect, but I was at least starting to kind of get the idea that I was getting away from thinking about the vertical strands and thinking about the horizontal bands of how light reflects, which is in that video that's on Reaper's channel. I talk about how that's the trick with hair, is that the texture and the way it's sculpted, unlike most objects, is opposite to the way light works on it. So that's the trick you have to figure out. So I think that's all the guys I brought, other than these little guys, which are just recent things I've been having fun with. These are color experiments. They're kind of me learning now that it's okay to just relax and kind of do, like, even if these hadn't been finished, it still would have been useful because I was playing with complementary colors. So it's orange and blue, and then red and green because pink is red. But then it was also me getting used to different paints. So this was when the Pathfinder colors came out. I wanted to kind of just focus on those colors. It's not 100% just the Pathfinder colors, because while that is a great set and I love a lot of the colors in there, it is weak on darker shadow colors. So, I mean, it has black, but it doesn't have like a lot of like a dark blue and stuff like that. So I think it includes blue liner and maybe something else. But other than that, I wanted to focus on forcing myself to sit down. Like when you have a lot of paint, sometimes you need to kind of say, okay, I want to make myself use this paint. Let me just check that wasn't Justin texting me or something. So, and I did a similar thing with this. So these are some of the Kickstarter colors. There's like Wild Orchid, and I can't remember what the orange one is called. And then the blue colors are some of the colors that are in the set for the ReaperCon this year, if you get the swag boxes. And then the brown. I think I allowed myself to use past ReaperCon colors too, because I haven't really used the characters much from last year. I'd like put them aside because I was going to swatch them, and then they've just been sitting in a place aside for like a year. So I was like, you know what, let's just grab some of those colors and paint with them and have some fun. And there's a third guy. I think these are actually troglodytes, and I think they're supposed to be like really tan and boring cave colors. And I didn't realize that when I picked them out. I thought they were some kind of like jungle creatures. So mine are jungle troglodytes, I guess. But I believe there is a third sculpt that goes in the pack, and I feel like now I have to do yellow and purple just to have one each of the main complementary colors. But that is, and so I was, even though these aren't meant to be fancy and they were kind of quick paints, I was trying to follow some of the principles of like using focus and where you put your colors and stuff like that, because I haven't always been as thoughtful about that as I should. So I've concentrated like the lighter colors on the horns and the teeth, and then having the strong contrast between the lips, the orange of the lips and the blue of the head. I'm attempting to draw your focus to the face, even though there are some powerful colors used elsewhere. And then his equipment is all pretty bland in comparison to the colors that are used on him to keep the focus on the figure. They've got these little, additional types of scales that are sculpted on their arms and legs. And I kept those pretty bland on both of the figures because, well, it's an interesting texture and it's nice to have something a little bit different there. If I made it a wildly different color, if I made it the same pink as that would probably draw more attention to the forearm, which is not like a pivotal part of the story or character of the figure. I was trying to push my contrast. I was not actually as interested in texture as I was in contrast. So these guys are actually sculpted with some nice like bumps, some texture bumps. I think you can see it more on the blue one. And I didn't really worry about that a lot. I was just doing quick wet blending. You could go the opposite way with these and do dry brushing and washing instead and focus on the texture. But for me, I was trying to focus on the idea of creating the forms and the focus and keeping the weapons and the weird decorate. Like, I don't know why they have ropes tied around their legs, but that's how they roll. That's what they use for decorations. So these are examples of plastic figures that you have a little more flexibility in how you're going to transport these. I mean, I would have no problem sticking those down with the double-sided tape and tipping my case upside down and not worrying about it. I also would just put them between layers of bubble wrap, or all kinds of answers for that. So hopefully that helped give you some information about how to transport your miniatures. And yes, it can be a little nerve-wracking, but it's not. People do it all the time. It can be done. Don't panic, I guess, is the end result of that. And now I think, I'm gonna have a Michael Proctor moment because I put my little handwritten schedule of the rest of the week away. So now I have to try to do it from memory. So the other things you can enjoy on the Reaper channel are, so Mondays, every day of the week, so Monday through Friday, you have Anne at, I think, 11:30. Currently, you also have the box packing show, which I think is the most popular show on Reaper that Reaper has ever done. And if you sign up, if you subscribe to the channel, you will get notified when the box packing show goes live. And for those who weren't here earlier, I checked with Justin before before I started the stream, and he was informed that the container is not arriving until tomorrow. So, so Monday through Friday, you get Anne with Reaper Pro Tips, and I think that's 11:30, and I think she goes for an hour and a half. Then Monday afternoon is me, and that's 2 to 4 p.m. These are all Central Times. That's Reaper time. Let's see. Tuesday is the Crow's Nest, which starts at... I think it used to start at 5, now it starts at 6. I think it starts at 6. Let's say 6. And it goes for an hour. And usually that's Michael and Jason talking to a guest who's in the industry in one way or another, and that's usually pretty interesting. Then Wednesdays is Miniatures Den with Luca in the afternoon. Quindy says 5. Quindy says Crow's Nest starts at 5. I know I'm in Eastern time, so that's probably why I get mixed up. And I really have no idea when Luca starts. It's in the afternoon. Yes. Then Thursdays, we have the Crafty Creative. I think it's called the Crafty Creative with Josh Foreman. And he's like it's a great name for his show because he's crafty and he's creative. Quindy says 2 for Luca at Miniatures Den. So if you like terrain and being imaginative and stuff like that, you should definitely check out Thursday afternoon with Josh. And then Thursday night, of course, is the flagship show, Reaper Live, that starts at, I'm going to say that one's 6 p.m. because I'm pretty sure it's 7 for me. I'm probably completely wrong. 2 for Josh as well. And then Friday is Reaperland with John and Dave and community fun and just general information. And Saturdays is Sadie, who's the current paint designer and paint mixer for Reaper, and her show is called Painting Platinum. So that is all of the current Reaper fun. New things added. I'm sure there's plans for more things in the future. I'm also pretty confident that we will be going into a raid. Although, Justin is very busy right now, so who knows for sure. But I'll assume that we're going into a raid. And if you want to catch any of these past shows, they stay on the Discord for a while. Or not Discord, on Twitch for a while. I said Discord because Darth Abacus just said something about it. But Reaper also archives everything onto its YouTube channel. So you can catch past show. Oh, I forgot the best show. Michael would be so sad. Every other week on Fridays, we do Reaper Errant. So we did it last week, so we won't be doing it this week. But the week after that, we'll be doing Reaper Errant, which is some of the painters and sculptors for Reaper go on a Dungeons and Dragons adventure that is hosted by Nightheart Gaming, and they have like miniatures and terrain, and it's a feast for the eyes. It's usually a feast for the ears as well because there'll be sound effects and music and stuff. It's a good time. So I get to hang out with my friends, and we get to goof around and try to amuse you. And then when the stars align on certain Fridays, you get House of Vex, which shows you how to use your Vex and or other airbrushes with Aaron Lovejoy. And if he taught me to airbrush, you can teach anyone to airbrush. Because I was very much afraid of the airbrush. Let me see if that was... Nope, that's still not Justin telling me anything about a stream. So I will just sign off, and I'm sure there's some other fun thing that you can find on Twitch to watch. I should be back here next week. I actually haven't thought a lot about what I'm doing next week. Normally I have an idea for what I'm doing next week, but I will have to ponder. It will probably... Quindy's going to set up our raid. It may be something kind of convention related, but it may not. And even if it's convention related, I try to make it still useful to the rest of your life. So have a good rest of your week, and I'll see you next week. Well, okay, I don't see the raid thing yet, so I will just... Okay, there's the raid thing. So we're going to Monument Slow Fuse. So have fun. Where is it? There we go.